You know the story. The greatest library in the ancient world, hundreds of thousands of scrolls. All of it philosophy, mathematics, medicine, astronomy, reduced to ash in a single night. Centuries of human knowledge gone forever because someone somewhere lit a match. It's a good story, it's also wrong. The Library of Alexandria didn't burn down. It faded, slowly, quietly. Over 300 years, and the real story, the one nobody tells, is more unsettling than any fire. This is what actually happened to the Library of Alexandria. Let's start with what it actually was. In the early 3rd century BC, under the Ptolemaic dynasty, Alexandria built something unprecedented. Not just a library, the Mouseion, a state-funded research institution. Scholars lived there, studied there, the Ptolemies paid for it, and they collected scrolls obsessively. Ships arriving in Alexandria's harbor were required to hand over any books on board. Royal scribes copied them. The copies went back to the owners. The original stayed. They sent agents across the known world to buy texts. Ancient sources claim the collection reached hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Even allowing for exaggeration, it was the largest concentration of knowledge the ancient world had ever assembled. So what about the fire? Here's where the myth splits from the record. In 48 BC, Julius Caesar was trapped in Alexandria, fighting a civil war. He ordered his ships burned to prevent them from falling into enemy hands. The fire spread to the docks. Historians now believe it burned a warehouse near the harbor, a storage depot holding books waiting to be shipped or cataloged. Not the library itself, because here's what the myth leaves out. The library kept functioning for centuries after Caesar was dead. Strabo wrote about working there in the late 1st century BC. Claudius built an addition to it in the 1st century AD. The institution didn't vanish after Caesar, it kept going. Caesar's own accounts of the Alexandrian War don't mention destroying a library. If you had accidentally burned down the largest collection of knowledge in the known world, you'd probably mention it. He didn't. What about the Christians? In 391 AD, a Christian mob destroyed the Serapeum, a massive temple in Alexandria. The Serapeum did house a collection of books, a daughter library of the original. But here's the detail the myth smooths over. Contemporary accounts describe the destruction of a pagan temple, not a library. The scrolls are barely mentioned. It's only centuries later, when Edward Gibbon wrote The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, that this event gets retconned into the death of the library. By 391, the main library had already been in decline for over 100 years. And the third myth is the easiest to dismiss. The story goes that when Arab forces took Alexandria in 642 AD, Caliph Omar ordered the books burned. If they agreed with the Quran, they were unnecessary. If they contradicted it, they were heretical. Either way, into the flames. The books supposedly fueled Alexandria's bathhouses for 6 months. It's a vivid image. It's also complete fiction. This story first appears nearly 600 years after the supposed event. It contradicts everything we know about early Islamic scholarship, which actively preserved and translated Greek and Roman texts. The scholars who would have supposedly burned these books are the same scholars whose translations kept classical knowledge alive through the Middle Ages. The Caliph Omar story isn't just wrong. It was invented centuries later to serve a narrative that had nothing to do with what actually happened. So the library wasn't destroyed by Caesar's fire, wasn't destroyed by a Christian mob, wasn't destroyed by a conquering army. 3 dramatic endings, none of them true. So what actually happened? The answer is slower than a fire, and in some ways, worse. You have to understand what the library was made of. Papyrus scrolls, organic material. In Alexandria's humid coastal climate, they didn't last forever. They decayed. They got eaten by insects. They needed to be recopied, constantly skilled scribes, working methodically, transferring aging text onto fresh papyrus. That recopying wasn't optional, it was the library's heartbeat. Stop the copying and you've set a timer. And that takes money. The Ptolemies funded it generously. But as Ptolemaic power weakened and Rome took control, the funding began to dry up. Here's the real story. No dramatic moment, just slow institutional decay. Rome saw Egypt as a resource, grain, taxes, strategic position, not as a center of learning. The Mouseion's budget got cut, then cut again. Fewer scribes, slower copying, scrolls aging, crumbling, with nobody to replace them. Political instability made it worse. Civil wars, changes in rulers. Each transition meant disrupted funding, staff leaving, institutional knowledge draining away. And as the library faded, scholars went elsewhere. Other centers of learning emerged across the Roman world. The best minds stopped coming to Alexandria. You know how this works because you've seen it happen to things you cared about. A program that loses funding gradually, an institution that slowly stops mattering. Nobody kills it, it just fades. The library didn't die in a fire, it died of neglect. You can actually track the disappearance in the historical record. References to the Mouseion and its scholars become rarer and rarer through the 3rd and 4th centuries AD. Then they stop entirely. Nobody announces its closure. Nobody writes a eulogy. It simply stops being mentioned. By the time anyone might have thought to burn it down, there likely wasn't much left to burn. So why does the fire story persist? Because it's a better story. A sudden catastrophe, knowledge destroyed in a single dramatic moment, is easier to process than the truth. The truth is that an institution dedicated to preserving human knowledge was slowly starved of resources until it couldn't sustain itself anymore. There was no villain, no single bad decision. Just decades of declining funding, shifting priorities, and people who assumed someone else would take care of it. Think about how many things you've seen follow that exact arc. In 2002, Egypt opened the Bibliotheca Alexandrina, a modern library and cultural center built near the site of the original. It holds millions of books, it serves millions of visitors. It's not a reconstruction of what was lost, that's impossible. But it's an acknowledgement that the real tragedy wasn't a single night of fire. It was centuries of neglect that could have been stopped at any point, by anyone who chose to fund it instead of letting it fade. You were probably taught the fire story in school. One version or another, Caesar, Christians. Caliph Omar, someone burned it. Something was lost forever. But the truth is less cinematic and more dangerous. The Library of Alexandria wasn't destroyed by an enemy who hated knowledge. It was abandoned by the people who were supposed to protect it. One budget cut at a time, one uncopied scroll at a time, until there was nothing left worth burning. That's the story that should keep you up at night.